Tourists thought feeding the ceremonial horse chocolate would make the perfect Instagram shot. "Here, sweetie, want some treats?" she cooed, unwrapping a candy bar as she approached the magnificent black horse at Horse Guards Parade. But what she didn't know was that chocolate is deadly poison to horses, and her cute photo opportunity could have killed one of Britain's most elite working animals. When Mounted Guard Corporal David Thompson saw the chocolate in her hand, his response was immediate and decisive. What happened next would teach her why you never, ever feed working animals without permission. Now, before we show you what happened when ignorant kindness nearly became animal cruelty, make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment telling us about the worst tourist behavior you've witnessed around animals. Now, let's get into it. Horse Guards Parade on a sunny Wednesday afternoon in June showcased one of London's most spectacular military traditions in full glory. The historic parade ground, which had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies and state occasions, was alive with the controlled energy of the household cavalry's daily inspection. Tourists from around the world gathered behind the designated barriers, cameras clicking constantly as they captured images of mounted guards whose horsemanship and military precision had become legendary symbols of British ceremonial excellence. Standing at attention astride his mount near the main archway was Corporal David Thompson of the Life Guards, representing 12 years of elite military service that had taken him from the battlefields of Afghanistan to the ceremonial duties that made him one of Britain's most recognizable soldiers. At 34, Thompson embodied the perfect fusion of combat veteran and ceremonial horseman, his scarlet tunic and plumed helmet creating a striking silhouette against the historic backdrop of surmise. But more importantly, Thompson represented the culmination of years of specialized training in both military discipline and expert horsemanship that few civilians could comprehend. Thompson's mount, a 17-hand black gelding named Wellington, was no ordinary horse. At 8 years old, Wellington represented the pinnacle of equine training and conditioning, selected from hundreds of candidates for his temperament, intelligence, and physical capability to serve as a ceremonial mount for the household cavalry. Every aspect of Wellington's daily routine was carefully managed by professional grooms, veterinarians, and riding instructors who understood that ceremonial horses required the same level of specialized care as elite athletes. His diet was precisely calculated to maintain optimal health and performance, consisting of high-quality hay, specially formulated grain mixtures, and supplements designed to support the unique demands of ceremonial duty. The partnership between Thompson and Wellington had been developed over 18 months of intensive training that transformed both horse and rider into a seamless unit, capable of performing complex ceremonial duties while managing the unpredictable challenges of working in one of London's busiest tourist areas. Wellington had been trained to remain calm despite crowds, noise, and the constant flash of cameras. But his training also included responses to potential threats or dangerous situations that might endanger his health or safety. Approaching the parade ground with her phone already recording was Jennifer Walsh, a 42-year-old elementary school teacher from Phoenix, Arizona, who was on the third day of her dream vacation to London. Jennifer loved animals with a passionate intensity that had led her to volunteer at animal shelters back home, as she had been looking forward to seeing the ceremonial horses. Since booking her trip 6 months earlier, her social media was filled with photos of the various dogs, cats, and horses she had encountered throughout her life, always accompanied by captions about the importance of animal welfare and responsible pet ownership. Jennifer had spent the morning researching the household cavalry online, reading about the history and traditions that made the mounted units such an important part of British military heritage. But what her research had focused on was the pageantry and history, rather than the practical aspects of caring for working horses, as she had no understanding of the strict protocols that governed every aspect of the animals' lives. Her knowledge of horse care came primarily from childhood riding lessons and Disney movies, rather than any practical experience with the specialized needs of military working animals. As Jennifer approached the barriers separating tourists from the ceremonial area, she was already planning the content she would create for her Instagram followers, who had been eagerly following her London adventure. She had brought what she considered thoughtful gifts for any animals she might encounter during her travels, including a selection of chocolate bars, candy, and snacks that she assumed would be welcomed by horses who probably didn't get many treats during their working day. What Jennifer didn't understand was that the barriers weren't just crowd control measures, but protective boundaries designed to safeguard both the horses and the public from interactions that could be dangerous for everyone involved. The mounted guards weren't tourist attractions, but working soldiers performing important ceremonial duties. And their horses weren't pets, but carefully trained military assets whose health and safety were protected by strict protocols that had been developed over decades of experience with public interaction. The irony of the approaching situation wasn't lost on the experienced grooms and handlers who worked behind the scenes to maintain the health and welfare of the household cavalry's horses. They had seen countless well-meaning tourists attempt to help or treat the ceremonial horses, never understanding that their good intentions could result in serious illness, injury, or even death for animals whose dietary and health requirements were as specialized as those of any elite athlete. Wellington, despite his impressive training and calm temperament, was still a horse with all the biological vulnerabilities that made certain human foods dangerous or deadly. His digestive system, evolved over millions of years to process grass and grain, was completely unable to handle the processed sugars, artificial additives, and toxic compounds found in chocolate and candy. A single chocolate bar could trigger colic, metabolic disruption, or potentially fatal toxic reactions that would require immediate veterinary intervention and could result in permanent injury or death. Thompson, from his position astride Wellington, could see Jennifer approaching with something in her hand, and his training in both military observation and horse management immediately put him on alert. The combination of an enthusiastic tourist with food items near his horse triggered every protective instinct that had been honed through years of experience, managing the complex interaction between ceremonial duties and public safety. But here's what Jennifer Walsh didn't know about Corporal David Thompson and his Mount Wellington. Thompson wasn't just a ceremonial soldier who looked impressive in uniform. He was a qualified veterinary technician whose expertise in equine health had been earned through years of specialized training that few people outside the military horse community could understand. Before joining the household cavalry, Thompson had spent 3 years working at a specialized equine hospital where he had seen firsthand what happened when horses consumed foods that their digestive systems couldn't process safely. Thompson's path to the household cavalry had begun with a childhood spent on his family's small farm in Yorkshire, where he had learned to care for horses before he could properly ride them. His grandfather had been a cavalry soldier in World War II, serving with horses in the final mounted operations of the British Army, and Thompson had grown up hearing stories about the bond between soldiers and their mounts that went far beyond simple transportation or ceremony. He understood that working horses were partners whose welfare was not just a moral obligation, but a practical necessity for mission success. The specialized training Thompson had received in equine health management went far beyond basic horsemanship or military ceremony. He had studied equine nutrition, digestive physiology, and emergency veterinary care with the same intensity that other soldiers studied weapons or tactics. He could recognize the early signs of colic, laminitis, and metabolic disorders that could disable or kill a horse within hours if not properly treated. More importantly, he understood the precise dietary requirements that kept ceremonial horses healthy enough to perform the demanding physical and mental tasks required by their duties. Wellington's selection and training represented an investment of nearly £50,000 and 2 years of intensive work by some of Britain's most skilled horse trainers and veterinarians. The gelding had been chosen not just for his size, color, and temperament, but for his genetic health, bone density, cardiovascular fitness, and psychological resilience necessary to work effectively in one of the world's most challenging equine environments. Every aspect of his daily routine was monitored and recorded by professionals who understood that ceremonial horses worked at a level of physical and mental demand comparable to Olympic athletes. The dietary protocols that governed Wellington's nutrition were based on decades of research into the specific needs of working horses operating in urban environments under high-stress conditions. His morning feed consisted of precisely measured portions of Timothy hay, oats, bran, and specialized supplements designed to support joint health, digestive function, and energy metabolism. Even treats were carefully controlled, limited to specific types of carrots or apples that had been approved by veterinarians, and provided in measured quantities at designated times. Thompson had seen what happened when well-meaning civilians fed inappropriate foods to horses, and the memories still haunted him. During his veterinary training, he had assisted in treating a beloved riding school horse that had been given chocolate by a child who wanted to share her Halloween candy. The horse had developed severe colic within hours, requiring emergency surgery that ultimately failed to save the animal's life. The child had been devastated to learn that her gesture of kindness had killed the horse. She was trying to help, but the lesson about the deadly nature of chocolate to equines had shaped Thompson's understanding of why military protocols existed to protect working animals. The biochemistry that made chocolate deadly to horses was complex but absolute. Theobromine, the compound that gave chocolate its distinctive flavor and mild stimulant effect in humans, was processed by horses so slowly that even small amounts could accumulate to toxic levels within their systems. A single chocolate bar could cause irregular heart rhythms, seizures, digestive system shutdown, and death within hours of consumption. The darker the chocolate, the higher the concentration of theobromine, making the artisanal dark chocolate bar that Jennifer was carrying potentially lethal to Wellington. But chocolate wasn't the only danger that concerned Thompson as he watched Jennifer approach his position. The artificial sweeteners, preservatives, and flavor additives found in modern processed foods were equally dangerous to horses, whose digestive systems had evolved to process simple plant materials rather than the complex chemical compounds created by food manufacturing. Even seemingly harmless treats like sugar cubes or mints could trigger metabolic disruptions that would require immediate veterinary intervention. Thompson's training had also taught him to recognize the psychological impact of dietary disruptions on horses' behavior and performance. Horses whose digestive systems were compromised by inappropriate feeding often became irritable, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous to handle, creating safety risks for both the animals and the humans around them. A ceremonial horse that became ill or behaviorally unpredictable couldn't perform its duties safely, potentially disrupting important state ceremonies or creating dangerous situations in crowded public spaces. The bond between Thompson and Wellington had been forged through hundreds of hours of training, grooming, and working together in situations that required absolute trust and communication. Thompson could read Wellington's body language and emotional state with the precision of someone who understood that his own safety depended on maintaining his mount's physical and psychological well-being. Wellington, in turn, had learned to trust Thompson's judgment completely, responding to subtle cues and commands that allowed them to function as a unified team. In challenging ceremonial environments, what Jennifer was about to attempt wasn't just feeding a horse, it was potentially poisoning a highly trained military asset, whose health and safety were protected by law as well as military regulation. Thompson's responsibility to protect Wellington extended beyond simple animal welfare to include the preservation of a centuries-old tradition that depended on maintaining the highest standards of equine care and management. Jennifer's approach toward Wellington was captured live on her Instagram story, broadcasting to nearly 3,000 followers who were eagerly watching her London adventure unfold in real time. She had been providing commentary about British military traditions and the beautiful horses she was seeing, but her followers were most excited about her promise to get closer to the animals for better photos and what she described as authentic interaction with the ceremonial horses. "Look at this gorgeous baby," Jennifer whispered to her phone camera as she moved closer to the barrier separating the public from the ceremonial area. "He looked like he could use some treats. I brought some chocolate from that amazing shop near my hotel." She held up a bar of artisanal dark chocolate, unwrapping it for her audience while moving steadily toward Wellington's position. This is the kind of authentic cultural exchange that makes traveling so meaningful. Thompson's trained eye immediately identified the chocolate in Jennifer's hand, and every alarm in his professional experience began ringing simultaneously. From his elevated position astride Wellington, he could see that Jennifer was moving with the determined purpose of someone who had already decided to feed his horse, and the dark chocolate she was unwrapping represented an immediate and potentially fatal threat to Wellington's health and safety. "Ma'am," Thompson called out with the calm authority that came from years of managing dangerous situations while maintaining ceremonial dignity, "please step back from the horse and put that chocolate away immediately. Chocolate is toxic to horses and can kill them." But Jennifer was to focus on her content creation to fully process the seriousness of Thompson's warning. She had encountered plenty of overly cautious animal handlers during her volunteering experience, and she assumed that Thompson was simply being unnecessarily protective of a horse that would obviously enjoy a sweet treat. Her followers were encouraging her in the live chat with comments like, "Give the pretty horse some chocolate," and "He looks hungry. It's just a little piece," Jennifer replied, continuing her approach toward Wellington while her phone continued broadcasting. "I work with animals all the time. I know how to treat them properly." She broke off a substantial piece of the dark chocolate and extended it toward Wellington's muzzle, close enough that the horse could smell the sweet aroma that made the candy appealing to humans but represented potential death to equines. Thompson's response was immediate and decisive. He dismounted from Wellington with the fluid grace that came from thousands of hours of practice, landing on the ground between Jennifer and his horse while simultaneously signaling for backup from the other mounted guards and ground crew who maintained constant vigilance around the ceremonial area. His movement was so swift and professional that Jennifer barely had time to register what was happening before she found herself facing a very serious military professional who was no longer tolerating her approach. "Ma'am, you need to step away from my horse immediately and dispose of that chocolate," Thompson said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made it clear this was not a request or suggestion, but a direct order from someone whose expertise was not subject to debate. "What you're holding is poison to this animal, and if you feed it to him, you could kill him." The word poison finally penetrated Jennifer's tourist enthusiasm and social media focus, causing her to pause in her approach toward Wellington. For the first time since beginning her interaction with the horse, she looked directly at Thompson rather than through her phone camera, as she began to realize that his concern was genuine rather than bureaucratic overprotectiveness. "Poison?" Jennifer asked, her voice showing the first hint of uncertainty as she looked down at the chocolate in her hand. "Well, it's just candy. I've seen people feed horses apples and carrots all the time. How could chocolate be different?" Thompson's training in both veterinary medicine and public education allowed him to shift seamlessly from protective authority to patient instructor, understanding that Jennifer's ignorance was dangerous but not malicious. "Chocolate contains theobromine, which horses cannot metabolize safely," he explained while carefully monitoring Wellington's position to ensure the horse remained out of reach of the toxic substance. "Even a small amount can cause heart problems, seizures, and death. It's the same reason you shouldn't give chocolate to dogs, but horses are even more sensitive." The seriousness in Thompson's voice was finally registering with Jennifer's followers, who could hear the entire exchange through her live stream. Comments that had previously encouraged her to feed the horse were now shifting to concern and embarrassment as viewers began to understand that they had been encouraging potentially deadly behavior. Several followers who had experience with horses began explaining in the chat why chocolate was dangerous to equines, and Jennifer could see the tide of opinion turning against her planned interaction. Palace security and additional household cavalry personnel had arrived on the scene, not because Jennifer represented a security threat, but because any situation involving potential harm to the ceremonial horses required immediate professional response. The senior groom approached Thompson's position with a concerned expression, understanding immediately from Thompson's posture and tone that he was dealing with a potentially serious situation. "What's the nature of the problem, Corporal?" the senior groom asked, though he could see the chocolate in Jennifer's hand and immediately understood the danger it represented. "Tourists attempting to feed chocolate to Wellington," Thompson replied concisely. "Situation contained, but we need to ensure proper disposal of the toxic material and educate the individual about appropriate horse interaction protocols." Jennifer was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake as she watched the professional response. Her simple treat had triggered. The revelation that her gesture of kindness could have killed Wellington was sinking in, replacing her enthusiasm with genuine horror at the potential consequences of her ignorance. "I had no idea," Jennifer said, her voice showing genuine remorse as she wrapped the chocolate back up and stepped away from Wellington. "I was just trying to be nice to him. I volunteer at animal shelters back home, and I would never hurt an animal intentionally." Thompson recognized the sincerity in Jennifer's distress and shifted his approach from protective authority to educational opportunity. "I understand that you meant well," he said, his tone becoming more patient while remaining firm, "but working horses have very specific dietary requirements that are managed by professional veterinarians and nutritionists. Even treats that seem harmless can cause serious illness or death. The senior groom stepped forward with a small bag of approved horse treats, offering them to Jennifer as an educational demonstration. These are the only treats that Wellington is allowed to have, and only in small quantities at specific times, he explained. Every aspect of his diet is carefully controlled to keep him healthy enough to perform his duties. Jennifer accepted the approved treats gratefully, understanding that she was receiving an education in proper horse care that she desperately needed. Her social media audience was witnessing her transformation, from ignorant tourist to educated animal advocate, and many of her followers were commenting about how much they were learning about proper animal care from watching her mistake and recovery. Thompson remounted Wellington with the same fluid grace he had shown in dismounting, settling back into his ceremonial position while continuing to monitor Jennifer's behavior to ensure she understood the boundaries that needed to be maintained. The crisis had been resolved without harm to the animal, but the educational opportunity it provided would benefit not just Jennifer, but the thousands of followers who had witnessed the entire interaction through her live stream. "Thank you for teaching me instead of just being angry," Jennifer said to Thompson as she prepared to move to a more appropriate viewing distance. "I'll make sure to share what I learned with my followers so they don't make the same mistake." Thompson nodded acknowledgement while maintaining his ceremonial bearing, understanding that the most important outcome of the incident was not Jennifer's embarrassment, but the education that would prevent similar dangerous situations in the future. Wellington remained calm throughout the entire interaction, trusting in Thompson's protection and demonstrating the kind of professional temperament that made him suitable for ceremonial duties in challenging public environments. Would you have known that chocolate could kill a horse before this story? Think tourists should be better educated about animal safety before approaching working animals? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and these conversations matter more than you know. If this story reminded you that even good intentions can be dangerous without proper knowledge, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Share this with someone who loves animals and needs to understand proper care protocols. More stories about protecting working animals from well-meaning but dangerous interactions are waiting right here on your screen. Click one now and I'll see you tomorrow with another reminder that the best way to show love for animals is to respect their specialized needs and trust the professionals who care for them. Until then, remember, when it comes to working animals, admire from a distance and let the experts handle their care.